great to have you with us. It's time to focus on Africa. Always a pleasure to be with you. Now, this week on the show, we feature highlights of President Kagame's session with youth at the celebration of the liberation of Rwanda. We get your views on the issues, and we have Africa's top 10. You're watching the Africa Leadership Dialogues. I'm Judy Gichuru. This week on the show, we have highlights from a very special session. As Rwanda marked 20 years of liberation since the genocide, President Paul Kagame joined youth leaders from across the African continent to discuss matters that touch on Africa. We bring you highlights of that session. Let's take a look at the journey of Rwanda.
Rwanda has made major strides in rebuilding its economy and bringing its people together following the Rwandan genocide in 1994, when the shooting down of the plane carrying President Juvenal Habyarimana and his Burundian counterpart near Kigali in April 1994 triggered what appeared to be a coordinated attempt by some Hutu leaders to eliminate the Tutsi population. Within 100 days, 800,000 Tutsis and moderate Hutus had been killed. The Rwanda genocide ended in mid-July 1994 when the Rwandan Patriotic Front took over the country. The RPF were a trained military group consisting of Tutsis who had been exiled in earlier years, many of whom lived in Uganda. Rwanda has used traditional Gashasha community courts to try those suspected of taking part in the 1994 genocide. The UN International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda has also convicted 27 people for their involvement in the genocide. Paul Kagame was born in October 1957 in Rwanda's southern province. His family fled pre-independence ethnic persecution and violence in 1960, crossing into Uganda where Kagame spent 30 years as a refugee. Determined to resist oppressive regimes, Paul Kagame joined current Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni and his group of guerrilla fighters to launch a war to free Uganda from dictatorship. Under the new government, he served as a senior military officer. In 1990, Paul Kagame returned to Rwanda to lead the Rwandan Patriotic Front's RPF 4-year struggle to liberate the country from the autocratic and divisive order established since independence. Led by Kagame, the Rwanda Patriotic Army defeated the genocidal government in July 1994, and the RPF subsequently set Rwanda on its current course towards reconciliation, nation-building, and socio-economic development. Kagame was appointed Vice President and Minister for Defense in the Government of National Unity on 19 July 1994. In the year 2000, he was elected as Rwanda's president by the Transitional National Assembly, and in August 2003, he won the first presidential elections. Kagame was re-elected to a second 7-year mandate in August 2010. President Kagame currently serves as chair of the UN Secretary-General's Advisory Group on MDGs and as co-chair along with Carlos Lim of the ITU's Broadband Commission. As president, he has prioritized national development, launching a program to transform Rwanda into a middle-income country by the year 2020. The country is developing rapidly on key indicators, including healthcare and education. Paul Kagame is married to Jeanette Nyiramongi and they have 4 children. He is a keen tennis player and football fan.
Now let's get straight to insights from President Paul Kagame. I have a favorite question that I like to ask when it comes to youth in Africa, and I'll start with that, and then I'll move very quickly to perceptions, our perceptions of ourselves and others' perceptions of us as Africa, which I think is a key issue you've highlighted. But my first question to you, Mr. President, has Africa let the youth in the continent down, or have the youth of Africa let the continent down? And this is asked particularly in the context of a lot of the increasing radicalism that we see the conflicts that we see across the continent. What are your thoughts?
Trying to avoid always apportioning blame and really taking responsibility, I would say maybe 40, 60.
The continent, 40?
Meaning the youth have been let down, 60, and the youth have let down the continent, 40.
Do you agree? By a show of hands, how many would agree generally with that kind of divide? Explain it to us. Explain your thoughts, Mr. President.
My thoughts are, of course, I think the continent, I was assuming you're talking about the leaders, the versus the youth, all of the continent. I think in some ways I would agree that we probably have not paid sufficient attention or have not created a conducive environment sufficiently to enable the youth to realize their potential. It's like really in a family. The health of the family, and especially the children, they need to be brought up. The environment in which they brought up helps them to move in one direction or another. So I think the upbringing on our part, I think the leaders of our continent, we have not done enough to bring up these youth to fully realize their potential. So that is, I was putting more blame on that. But I would say also that the youth really need not just sit back and be recipients of this generosity of their leaders. I think sometimes they need to stand up, and I again talked about it, and also do their part. And in some cases, some attitudes also affect the healthy process of our growth of our continent, in a sense that this whole mindset of entitlement. Mm-hmm. It's like you may sit back and just complain about not being given this or that, and forget that you actually have to play a big role, even if people may owe you certain things, which I have accepted in the 60%. Mm-hmm. There is also the fact that, one, you must do your part, you must merit certain things, you must be demanding, you must work hard, you must try to learn as fast as possible, learn things that will improve your life. So this is really what I meant.
In many ways, we can be our own worst enemies, because very often we feed into those perceptions ourselves as Africans. And I've heard this numerous times: Africans putting Africans down, African putting African leaders down, Africans putting youth down. We do it to ourselves. But mindset is critical towards succeeding. You've got to first believe you can do it.
Right.
Who plays the key role in transforming mindsets in Africa? But first, Mr. President, what are your thoughts on who bears the key responsibility with respect to mindset change?
The simple answer is everyone. Yes. Again, it has to be everyone. And again, maybe it comes to something you mentioned earlier, whether it was about governments or the private sector or academia and so on. I think they have to work together. Each has what to bring to the table. Mm-hmm. Whether you think one is more important than the other, it only becomes so in one aspect. But you find in another aspect, the other one is even more important. So
they feed into
one another. So I think really it's about everyone having to play their part. and then working together. Because at the end of the day, the problem is not linear. It has all kinds of shapes and moves in all kinds of directions to be a problem that would be addressed by one group or one person or another. So always working together, bringing things together. The aggregation of these efforts is what is really more important than anything else.
So if we could take questions on the ideas of are we doing enough when it comes to fighting those perceptions, mindset change and injustices. Please, Robert, go ahead.
Your Excellency, I ask your permission, and I know you'll grant it, to address you not as president, but as a senior comrade. Sure. Because we're discussing liberation here, not administration.
Yes. That's why I didn't come with a tie.
And I'm in jeans, Your Excellency. Your Excellency, 2 points. One is, I'll start with the question, and then I'll end with a disappointment with you, and particularly the liberation leaders. Question to you as perhaps the most youthful of the liberation generation. Which is the next front line? What's our next front line for us, for the new generation, that they should focus on? You focused on the armed struggle for democracy and rebuilding the country. What should the young people focus on particularly as the area of struggle? My disappointment with you is, why did your generation kill politicization as a method of building consciousness, political consciousness amongst young people? In Uganda, it was done deliberately. I am a product of that.
Of killing it? Or?
No. In a sense, yes, because yes.
You are a key influencer, Robert, which is why I came to you.
And in Uganda, I know, and in other countries. So, for instance, your generation was politicized by the generation earlier, the Mwalimu Nyerere's and Kwame Nkrumah and that group, Ahmed Ben Bella. Your generation politicized us. What have you put in place now that you're in charge of the state and in charge of resources and able to cause enormous change? What are you doing to build this generation?
Why does Africa, the youth, and even some of us very old ones, why do we become comfortable with the world having low expectation about us? That was the deliberate question. And it is the answer to that first question. That is the next frontier. It's about the mindset change. Wow. You fought with the guns, you did this, you removed, governments that were no good for their own people, and so on and so forth. But after that, there's always, from one place to another, there's a constant you find. People, it's like mediocrity is okay to put up with. Low expectation about you is something you can live with. So this is not something you can shoot your way through. This is something else. Yeah. This is another liberation phase. This is exactly what, for me, I have in mind, that we need to keep working on.
Will you be a president who actually steps down and says, I've done all this for Rwanda now, let's see the rest, take it forward? What are your thoughts on that?
This divide you want to put in a society to say it's these, it's the young, it's the old, it's the women, and then you want to treat them each on their own, has a downside to it. That's why I said, if we do the best in every one of these categories, but remember to bring everything together, we stand a better chance. So here it shouldn't be sounding like it's the young versus the old. Then you've already introduced a problem. The young are there. They have a lot of energy, they must get their place, their responsibilities, their rights, and so on and so forth. And the old are there. If you don't join them, so that there is a seamless, there is a flow of ideas and action for the good of everyone, you will have a problem. Because you don't even want to create a situation where there is always, again, we go back to the same thing we have talked about. It's like a situation one is imagining where the old are fearful of the young, that the young are coming up to take power from us. Now, the moment you think like this, you're introducing a problem which is not necessary. The young, the old, we are all there for the common good, for all of us. We're talking about nations, we're talking about people. We are not talking about just the young people, however important they are. We're not talking about the old people, however important they may be. We're talking about people. That's one. So it's important to mark that. The second is the issue about power. And taking it from that first part of the point, it's not about struggle of power from the young to the old, or from the old to the young, to the youth. It's power that also brings or integrates stakeholders in it. Now, let me put that aside, come to the very question which was more or less also personalized. Am I going to be the one to do this or to do that? In a way, it devalues the kind of argument we have at hand, where now everything else that will happen or has to happen will depend on my decision. I think it is wrong. To be asking me, will you be the one to do, then we are missing the point, because the point originally was to create situations, to create processes where things happen, not just because what one person has decided or the other. But
so
one
institutionalism.
makes... Absolutely. Okay. Then one has introduced the whole idea of whether the old people going and giving way to the young depends to one old person who is there to decide. That's already a problem.
Stay with the Africa Leadership Dialogues.
There are many lessons that we can learn from what has happened in and across North Africa. We thank goodness that Tunisia has found its stability. It is still, still moving forward. But we look at the radicalization that's happening across the continent. We look at the renewed conflicts. and the role that the youth are playing. And perhaps the question that you asked is, you were analyzing the commitment of young people. I think the commitment, are African youth bothered and impatient? I think they are. The question is, how do they ensure they do not head down a path for destruction for themselves and their countries, as opposed to a path for positive growth?
Absolutely. It's critical. Maybe I should have added that it's not enough to be impatient, to be angry, it's also to be thoughtful about it, to understand the different pathways before you, so that you are able to get the best outcome of it. The intention is not just to bring change for the sake of change. Of course, you always want to bring change for the better.
Do we reignite the African spirit? There are some Africans who say there is no notion of Africa as such because we are too diverse. I totally disagree with that. I believe in our gut there's something that connects us all, but how do we start to reignite that?
There is something that is common about us, is something that is good, but I've been watching the World Cup in my free time. And it's like I'm almost, punching the screen of the TV, because you have these African teams, individually, the best players, but come together. And you see something, they have everything in them, but I wish I was the coach of one of the teams.
That might be a challenge for another lifetime.
What I'm really saying is, sometimes they even when they have lost, they are thankful. It's like they are thankful to the team they've lost to.
Yeah.
No, this is not African.
Mr. President, the challenge to you now. The challenge now, I think, is for us to see a Rwandese team up there. Yes, and you can coach it.
We
so
are trying.
that's
Yes, when it comes to building a team, we will try.
Across the continent, Mr. President, one of the challenges we have is for many of the young people, they simply don't know where Africa has come from. They have no idea. You even try to get them to look back 10 years. They have no knowledge. Now, as media, what is our responsibility and what is the responsibility of society in ensuring that Africans understand their heritage but also are able to look forward to the future? Please,
Generali and Obo have done a bad job of informing them where they are.
Julie, you truly are something.
Oh, no, I hope that's in a positive way.
No, I had determined never to stand here, ask any question or make any comment, but seeing the way you have kept the president so happy and relaxed and there is no way I can say no to your request. But I think we need to engage all of us, whether in government, in civil society, in the media, as you said, in education. It's education, education, education. To remind not only the young people, but also ourselves of a certain age, where we came from, the kind of challenges. I said this morning when I was setting the tone for this discussion, that you have to know why were we colonized? If a child today can ask you, but Dad, independence from what? And you say from colonial administration. You mean some people came from outside there and they imposed their rule on you and you accepted? You say yes. Why? And you say, I don't know, but maybe we were bewitched. There is something that is really belittling about even admitting that we were once colonized. Now, what I get from the president's remarks this afternoon is we made a mistake. Well, we made some mistakes in the past. The big thing now is to ensure that through education, through conscientization, our young people learn to commit themselves to never again allow the mistakes of the past to recur. And I think this is a task that both government and the people generally can engage in. But Mr. President, we have not failed to inform our people. We have tried to inform our people. But one thing I would like to ask you, Mr. President, is to rescue this situation in terms of encouraging, of incorporating in whatever you have done at national level and maybe at continental level within the AU, the culture of writing and reading. We are really suffering from this deficit of a culture of writing and reading. There are more books written about the Rwandan experience, however tragic it was, by foreigners from America, from Belgium, from England, and elsewhere, than written by Rwandese intelligentsia.
Sure.
2 weeks ago, we were at a launch in Dar es Salaam of a book titled Nyerere, The Early Years. It was written by a young Don from the University of Edinburgh. And Nyerere is ours. He's Tanzanian, he's Rwandese, he's African. But we didn't have a book like that about Nyerere's early years. And it's because people say, who shall sponsor me to spend 5 years without earning a living so that I can write the story of Paul Kagame? And once I've written a story of Paul Kagame, who will buy it? Because people don't read on this continent. I think we should incorporate in our curricula, in our regular discourse, the issue of encouraging people to read so that people can write. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Another issue that would feed into mindset change. Before you comment on what Generali said, and our time is really up, I just want to say, Mr. President, as a young African who watched what happened in 1994 from afar, it was a tragedy for us all. But sitting here in Rwanda 20 years later, under an administration that has transformed this nation, I can say you've given Africa our dignity back. I believe that is a role that Mandela played when he liberated South Africa with a spirit of reconciliation. I believe that is something that you are doing in transforming Rwanda and saying we have come from where we've come from, but we are moving forward. We are powering ahead. I hope as young Africans, what we can take from the Mandelas and the story of Paul Kagame and Rwanda and all the others who are transforming the continent, our Julius Nyereres and the rest of them, is that we should be the solutions to our own problems and that our problems are our greatest opportunities. On that note, please, Mr. President, give us your final word.
Simply, I won't say much relating to what General has just said, other than agreeing with him in many regards, and then saying that more or less everything has been said. What remains is for all that to be done. And let me just wind up on one small remark that what you've just said very accurately, given what happened here in Rwanda and the huge loss of life and so on and so forth. And then Rwanda rising out of that. I just wanted to again repeat that for the young people of Africa and for all Africans, there is everything in us to overcome our challenges. And this, in this particular case of Rwanda, if Rwanda can overcome our tragic history and situation and make some decent progress, I think other African people and countries can do it and can even do it better. So on that note, I just wanted to end there. Thank you.
Stay with the Africa Leadership Dialogues.
Powerful insights there from President Paul Kagame. Now let's get your views on the issues.
This week we asked you, how can Africa's youth help steer the continent to increased progress and prosperity? Joyce Olayo says, youth shouldn't be frustrated by the rate of unemployment in many African countries. Instead, they should use the available resources to get themselves employed. I think most of the youth are afraid to be the starters of production. Dropping that fear is the beginning of progress.
Stephen Maende says, African youth should realize that the time is now for them to take up a mantle of leadership in both socio-economic and political arenas. They must stop being manipulated by the wealthy, power-hungry politicians. With this, Africa will rise.
My name is Dennis Gashango and you're watching Africa Leadership Dialogues. Ways in which youths can steer development in Africa are through participating in innovation, in science and technology and other areas, participating in sports and culture through arts, for example, and also actively participating in political forums to positively impact on development in their various societies.
To join our conversation, go to our G+ page, Africa Leadership Dialogues, on Facebook, Africa Leadership Dialogues, on Twitter, @AfricaLD, and on WhatsApp, send your video comments to +254 715 816 033.
Time now for Africa's Top 10.
On Africa's Top 10 this week, we feature the top factors that will shape Africa's transformation in the current and future generations. Starting us off at number 10 is climate change and adapting to a green economy. Emerging African economies will require new models and a greater commitment to preserving the environment. Africa can achieve sustainable development by scaling up green economy initiatives and engaging in projects that will help reduce greenhouse gas emissions as well as help to adapt to climate change while boosting income. At number 9 is the increase in competitiveness through regional integration. Africa's small markets mean that the continent must develop greater economies of scale through deeper regional integration in order to be competitive and more attractive to investors. This requires a range of critical interventions such as removing non-tariff barriers, fast-tracking infrastructure to link countries more effectively, and developing the political will to drive regional projects. Coming in at number 8 is acceleration of investment in frontier markets. Africa has become a new global investment frontier, with investors increasingly looking beyond its rich resource base to other sectors where growth is expected to take place on the back of high economic growth, rising incomes, and the growth of the private sector. Accelerating infrastructure investments takes the number 7 spot. Infrastructure is the lifeblood of economic development and is critical to Africa's transformation. The private sector needs to engage and help close Africa's infrastructure gap, which will require an estimated $90 billion annually, and private partnerships based on guidelines that deal with risk. Slotted in at number 6 is transforming healthcare. African economies could reclaim billions of dollars from lost productivity due to disease and ill health. For healthcare innovations to be replicated and scaled for greater impact, Africa needs to reduce infections through better data, promote social innovations for healthier lifestyles, and leverage technology to monitor healthcare. Positioned at number 5 is transforming African agriculture. African agriculture is undergoing a transformation, creating a new era of opportunity for both farmers and investors. This sector is drawing new investment as multinational companies seek greater local content in their African operations through partnerships with smallholder farmers and as investors seek large-scale commercial opportunities to grow food and energy crops for global markets. Taking the number 4 spot is translating growth into jobs. Although most economic activity takes place at the level of micro, small and medium enterprises, there is insufficient policy or funding focus on this level of business. For ideas to be translated into economic opportunities for millions of entrepreneurs, the enabling environment must become more supportive. It is critical to change the youth from being job seekers to job creators by putting in place supportive measures that allow them to succeed. At number 3 is a need to support democracies. Leaders on the continent increasingly share the same political philosophy that we need to support democracies, and we need to be careful not to allow anti-democratic elements to take root on the continent again. Building institutional capacity and promoting shared responsibility are some of the factors that can go a long way in supporting democracies. Women empowerment comes in at number 2. Transformation can only be achieved and sustained if it is inclusive. Participants generally agreed that the gender gap must be addressed, but were diverged on how to achieve it. Mentoring by both women and men to women and girls is critical. The only way to get women into the political and business sectors is through legislation. And our number 1 this week is bold leadership. Africa is on the brink of a new era of opportunity, growth, and development, and its leaders will play a crucial role in ensuring their countries are ready to take up this challenge. Courage and vision are required from African leaders to transform economies, to enable them to play a more prominent role in today's changing global order. And that's Africa's Top 10 this week.
It's time to close the show, and the story of Rwanda shows that Africa needs strong and focused leaders. We end with a quote on this very issue, and it goes, "He who fears the sun will not become chief." Africa needs strong leaders to rise to the challenges that it faces, strong and selfless leaders. So do not fear the sun, or you will not rise to the occasion. Blessings to you, and blessings to Africa.